Marcus Hale had not cried in 11 years. He had buried his mother without a single tear, signed his divorce papers with a steady hand, and stood at the graveside of his best friend while keeping, his jaw locked and his eyes dry. He was a man who had trained himself to feel nothing, because feeling nothing meant losing nothing, and losing nothing meant surviving everything. At 52 years old, he was the CEO of one of the most powerful logistics companies in the world, with offices in 14 countries and a net worth that most people could not count on their fingers. He sat alone in Terminal C of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, nursing a black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, waiting for a red-eye flight that would take him to yet another city, where yet another boardroom, full of strangers, would applaud him for things that no longer made him feel anything at all. His suit was perfectly pressed. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and behind his eyes, there was a darkness so deep and so quiet that even he had stopped noticing it anymore. That was when she appeared. She was no older than 6 or 7, with 2 lopsided pigtails and a bright yellow backpack shaped like a sunflower. She plopped herself into the seat, directly beside him, with the total confidence that only small children and very old people seem to possess. The kind of confidence that does not ask permission and does not apologize for taking up space. She looked at him with enormous brown eyes, and without any greeting or introduction, she said, "You look sad." Marcus blinked. He glanced around for a parent, a guardian, anyone who belonged to this small creature. But the nearest adult was a tired-looking woman a few seats away, fast asleep with a travel pillow around her neck. He cleared his throat and said, "I'm fine, thank you." The little girl tilted her head. "My grandma says when people say they're fine, they usually aren't." Marcus had no answer for that. He took a slow sip of his cold coffee and stared at the departure board. The little girl swung her feet back and forth, studying him with the kind of unfiltered attention that adults spend, their whole lives learning to hide. Then she asked, in the most serious voice he had ever heard from someone so small, "Where will you go when you're sad?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his chest. Like a door that had been bolted shut for a very long time had just moved, barely a millimeter, but enough to let a sliver of light through. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. She shrugged her small shoulders. "Like when I'm sad, I go to my grandma's kitchen. She makes me warm rice and sits with me and doesn't say anything, just sits, and it fixes it." She paused thoughtfully. "Do you have a place like that?" Marcus Hale, no, who had spoken in front of presidents and kings, who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without flinching, found that he could not answer that question. He opened his mouth and closed it again. He thought of his empty apartment in Manhattan, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and photographs on the walls. He thought of his office with its glass desk and its view of the skyline, a view he had stopped seeing years ago. He thought of every city he had ever traveled to, and he realized with a clarity that hit him like cold water that he could not name a single place in the world where he felt safe enough to be sad. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. The little girl watched him without judgment, without impatience, just quiet and steady and present in the way that people rarely ever are. And Marcus Hale, CEO of Hale Tech Global, iron-jawed and untouchable, felt his eyes fill with tears for the first time in 11 years. He did not sob. He did not break down. He simply sat there and let 2 tears roll silently down his face. And somehow, in that little airport chair under flickering fluorescent lights, it felt like the bravest thing he had ever done. "No," he whispered. "I don't have a place like that." The little girl nodded slowly as if this was a very important piece of information. Then she reached into her sunflower backpack and pulled out a small, slightly crumpled drawing, a yellow house with a blue door and big green trees. She held it out to him with both hands. "You can have this," she said. "So now you have one." He took the drawing. His hands were not steady anymore. The mother woke up a few minutes later and came rushing over with apologies, pulling the little girl gently away, but Marcus barely heard any of it. He was still holding that small, crumpled piece of paper, like it was the most valuable thing he had ever been given, because it was. He did not board his flight that night. He sat for a long time in that terminal, alone but somehow less lonely than he had been in years, and he made a decision. He would go home. not to the Manhattan apartment. Home, to the small Ohio town where he had grown up, to the cemetery where his mother was buried, to the old house where his memories still lived, to the places inside himself he had spent a decade running from. Sometimes all it takes is one small voice to ask the question that everyone else is too afraid to ask. Sometimes all it takes is a child who sees your sadness and hands you a yellow house with a blue door, and suddenly you remember that you are allowed to have somewhere soft to land. If this story moved something inside you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it today, and subscribe to Impressive Tales for more stories that remind us what it truly means to be human.